Maria owned a small diner in a quiet neighborhood. Times were hard, and she struggled to keep her restaurant open. One rainy evening, an elderly man walked in. Though her own bills were piling up, she saw the hunger in his eyes and served him a warm meal free of charge. The man ate quietly in the corner. When he finished, he left something on the table. It wasn't money, it was a simple note that would change Maria's life in ways she never imagined. Maria had owned her diner for 5 years. It was a cozy place on a quiet street corner with just 8 tables and a small counter. The red and white checkered curtains were faded, but she kept everything spotlessly clean. Every morning, she woke up at 4 a.m. to prepare the food. She made everything from scratch using recipes her grandmother had taught her. The smell of fresh bread and soup filled the tiny kitchen as she worked alone. To save money on staff, business had been slow lately. After closing time, Maria looked at her bills spread across the counter. Her hands trembled as she counted the day's earnings. It wasn't enough for next month's rent. She thought about her 2 children at home. Tommy was 12 and Sophia was 9. They needed new school supplies, but she couldn't afford them. Maria wiped her eyes and kept counting the money again, hoping she had made a mistake. The weather forecast showed rain all week. Rainy days meant fewer customers. Maria sat in her empty diner wondering if she should sell her wedding ring. Her late husband would understand. The children needed to eat. That evening, the rain poured heavily outside. The street lights cast long shadows through the diner's windows. Maria was about to close early when she heard the bell above the door ring. An old man walked in, his clothes soaked from the rain. He stood quietly by the door, water dripping onto the floor. His gray hair was messy, and his coat had holes in it, but there was something gentle about his eyes. Maria noticed how thin he looked. His hands shook slightly as he held onto his worn hat. Maria walked up to the old man with a warm smile. She could see he was embarrassed about his wet clothes dripping on her clean floor. She grabbed a clean towel from behind the counter and handed it to him. "I haven't eaten in 3 days," the man said softly, his voice trembling. "I lost my job last month and spent my last dollars on medicine." His eyes looked down at the floor. "I have no money for food." Maria remembered her first year in America. She had gone to bed hungry many nights, saving every penny for her children's food. The memory of that hunger was still fresh in her mind. She guided the old man to a corner table. "Don't worry about money today," she told him. The man tried to refuse, but Maria was already walking to the kitchen. She turned the stove back on and started cooking. She wanted to give him something special, something that would warm his body and soul. She made her grandmother's chicken soup, the recipe she saved for her own family. The vegetables were fresh, and she added extra chicken. The soup simmered as she baked a fresh batch of bread. The warm smell filled the empty diner. While cooking, Maria thought about her own father. He had passed away 10 years ago. This old man reminded her of him, the same kind eyes and gentle voice. She wondered if her father had ever gone hungry without telling anyone. The old man sat quietly, watching the rain outside. Maria noticed he kept wiping tears from his eyes. She pretended not to see, wanting to protect his dignity. She knew how hard it was to accept help sometimes. When the soup was ready, Maria added a generous portion of bread on the side. She also packed some extra bread and cookies in a paper bag. Tomorrow might be another hungry day for him, she thought. She couldn't let that happen. She served him the meal with the same care she would show her own father. The man stared at the steam rising from the bowl. The portion was big enough for 2 people, but Maria knew he needed it. His hands were shaking as he picked up the spoon. The old man took his first spoonful of soup. A tear rolled down his cheek as he tasted it. "This reminds me of my mother's cooking from long ago," he told Maria, his voice soft. He began sharing memories of family dinners from his childhood. Maria sat with him while he ate. The diner was empty anyway, and something told her he needed company more than food. He introduced himself. "My name's Robert. I used to be an accountant before the company downsized last month. Robert ate slowly, savoring every spoonful. I worked at the same company for 30 years, he said. When they let me go, they only gave me 2 weeks' pay. My savings went to medical bills after my wife passed away last year. Maria listened and nodded. She shared some of her own story too. I came to America, lost my husband, and raised 2 children alone, she said. She told him about her dreams for the diner, her voice getting quieter as she mentioned her current struggles. Robert finished his meal and sat back with a content sigh. Color had returned to his face. He looked different now, more alive. He reached into his worn coat pocket and pulled out a small notepad. His hands were steady now as he wrote something. Maria started clearing his plates. Keep the paper bag with the extra food, she told him. Robert smiled. Thank you. No one has shown me such kindness in years, he said, his eyes sparkling as he looked around the diner one last time. When Robert stood up to leave, he placed a folded note on the table. Maria tried to stop him. You don't need to leave anything, she said, but he just smiled and walked to the door. The rain had stopped now. He turned and gave her one last look before leaving. Maria watched him disappear into the night. She walked over to his table, expecting to find a thank you note. What she found instead made her sit down in shock. Her hands trembled as she read the words on the paper. The note was written in neat handwriting. At first, Maria thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. She read it again and again, each time her heart beating faster. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The note wasn't just a thank you message, it was a business card and a handwritten letter. Robert wasn't just any accountant. He had been the chief financial advisor for one of the city's largest restaurant chains. The company that let him go was a major investment firm. The letter explained, I have been watching your diner for weeks. I saw how you treat every customer like family. I noticed your dedication to quality food. I've been looking for someone exactly like you, someone with both skill and heart. I have powerful friends in the restaurant business. I promise to return tomorrow with investors. I see potential in your little diner. Your kindness tonight proved you're the kind of person we want to work with. Maria's hands shook as she read the part about his connections. He mentioned names she had seen in business magazines, people who owned restaurant chains across the country. She could hardly believe they would be interested in her small diner. She stayed up late that night cleaning everything again. Her mind was racing. Could this really be happening? She thought about her children, about finally being able to buy them new clothes, about paying off her debts, about expanding her diner. The next morning, Maria arrived earlier than usual. She made fresh coffee and baked extra bread. Her heart jumped at every sound of the door opening. Each customer made her wonder if they were the investors Robert had mentioned. Around lunchtime, a group of people in business suits walked in. Robert was with them, looking completely different. His clothes were expensive now, he stood tall and confident, but his kind eyes were the same. He smiled at Maria like they shared a secret. The investors sat at several tables and ordered different items from her menu. This looks amazing, one of them said as they glanced at the menu. Maria's hands trembled as she cooked, but she put all her love into each dish. She remembered her grandmother saying, "Food made with love always tastes better." They stayed for 2 hours, talking quietly among themselves. Maria saw them nodding as they tasted her food. Robert walked around the diner, showing them the space. "This is where the magic happens," he said, gesturing at the walls and windows. The investors took notes and made phone calls. Before leaving, the investors gathered around Maria's counter. "We want to invest in your diner," one of them said. "Our plan will keep everything you love about your restaurant, but help it grow. We'd like to open 5 more locations across the city." The changes started happening quickly. They hired more staff, so Maria didn't have to work alone anymore. They kept all her recipes exactly the same. "Your grandmother's chicken soup will be our signature dish," one investor told her. It's the heart of the business. Within 6 months, Maria's diner transformed. They expanded into the empty store next door. The checkered curtain stayed, but everything else received a gentle update. Regular customers still came every day, happy to see that the food and service remained the same. Robert became Maria's business advisor. He helped her understand the finances and contracts. He never mentioned that night in the rain, but sometimes when he ate her soup, she caught him smiling with the same look he had on that first evening. Maria could finally buy her children new school supplies. She moved them to a better apartment closer to school. Tommy and Sophia were proud of their mom. They helped at the diner on weekends, learning the recipes just like Maria had learned from her grandmother. 1 year later, all 5 new locations were open. Each one had the same checkered curtains and warm feeling. Maria trained every cook, personally teaching them her grandmother's recipes. Remember, she told them, every customer should feel like family. The best part was hiring people who needed help. Maria remembered her own struggles. She gave jobs to single parents and students. She made sure everyone had enough to eat. No one leaves hungry, she told her staff, even if they couldn't pay. Robert still came by for soup every week. Your kindness that rainy night wasn't just about the food, he told Maria. It was about dignity, about treating people with respect. That's what makes you special. That's what makes your restaurant successful. Maria kept the note Robert left that night. She framed it and hung it in her office. It reminded her that kindness can change lives in unexpected ways. Sometimes, when she looked at it, she thought about how one small act of compassion had transformed not just her life, but the lives of so many others.